Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julia Joja, and I'm a senior fellow at the Frontier Europe Initiative that is hosting the event today. I welcome you to today's webinar with three distinguished ambassadors to discuss three elections and their outcomes in the Black Sea region, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. The three countries share the problems of separatist and frozen conflicts on their territories that affect their security and stability, even in times of elections, or particularly then. Elections have also in the region coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic and an economic crisis with potentially devastating effects for the entire region. And finally, election outcomes in all three countries will have important implications for the foreign policy orientation of the countries and their role in the Black Sea region. In Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, three countries with association agreements with the European Union that have benefited from significant Western support over the last many years, important elections have taken recently place. Moldova saw the election of opposition candidate Maya Sandu as a president. In Georgia, the country's ruling party swept parliamentary elections. And in Ukraine, October's local elections reflected a low turnout in terms of voters and pretty complex results. Today, we are pleased to host the ambassadors of these three countries to the United States to reflect on election outcomes and what they might mean for engagement with the West and generally foreign policy. First, I would like to welcome Ambassador David Bakrazy. Welcome, Ambassador. His Excellency was appointed Ambassador of Georgia to the United States in Washington, D.C. in December 2016. Ambassador Bakrazy has a long and distinguished career in diplomatic service. Since 1997, he has served in a number of senior official posts in Georgian public service. And prior to the appointment to the United States, he served as the State Minister of Georgia for Euro-Atlantic integration. Next, I am pleased to introduce Ambassador Eugene from Moldova. Welcome, Ambassador. Prior to Ambassador Karash's appointment in March 2020, His Excellency was Presidential Advisor on Foreign Policy and Moldova's ambassador to the European Union for 7 years. Ambassador Karash has also served in Moldova's embassies in Turkey, Ukraine, and the United States, and has a long and distinguished career in Moldova's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he served since 1994. And last but not least, we have His Excellency Volodymyr Yelchenko, Ambassador of Ukraine to the United States since 2019. Welcome, Ambassador Yelchenko. Prior to his appointment as ambassador, His Excellency was representative of Ukraine to the UN Security Council and the United Nations overall. And before that, permanent representative of Ukraine to the United Nations. Ambassador Yelchenko has also had a distinguished career in diplomacy for decades now. And I look forward to taking audience questions through Zoom's Q&A feature, which you can all find on your screens. For those calling in by phone or watching our panel on live stream, you can ask a question by emailing events@mei.edu. And if you have any technical questions, please email the same address, events@mei.edu. Feel free, please, to ask questions at any time throughout the panel and through our chat function. I will be looking, or through the Q&A function, I apologize. I will be looking at all of your questions and will weave in as many as possible into our conversation today. So to kick off the conversation, perhaps I could start with a question to Ambassador Karash. The second round of presidential elections has finalized with a big win for Maya Sandu, former Prime Minister of Moldova, elected now President of Moldova. Elections took place during the COVID pandemic and in an economic crisis. So my question to you, Your Excellency, is what can you tell us about the election process in Moldova and about the outcome of these elections?
Well, thank you very much, Yulia, for having me today. And indeed, I would like to express gratitude to this invitation to participate in this panel. Indeed, the Black Sea region, I believe, is an important region, including from the US perspective. And I think we are facing in the Black Sea region a lot of complex challenges to the security, and I think it's important that we take, so to say, the temperature out from the processes in the region. You've mentioned the elections, and with your suggestion, I will go a bit through how the election process went, and maybe later on to talk about how we see the prospects for foreign policy, or what would be the implications on the Moldovan foreign policy later on during this mandate. So I'll try to give you a non-partisan, so to say, view take on the elections. And indeed, the first round was on November 1st, and we had 8 candidates. None of them got a majority. So the two frontrunners were Maia Sandu, with 36.2% of the votes, and incumbent President Igor Dodon with 32.6% of the vote. So it was a pretty large participation, a bit over 48% of the registered voters, and 3.6 difference between the first and second placed candidates. On November 15, we had a runoff, and according to what the Central Election Commission stated, in spite of some minor irregularities, shortcomings, the elections were free and fair. And the same, of course, is also stated by the OSCE Ordeal Observation Mission. I can give you just the first sentence of their preliminary conclusions. In the runoff of the presidential election, voters had a choice between political alternatives, and the fundamental freedoms of assembly and expression continued to be respected. So, of course, we all acknowledge that there is room to improve, but overall, as I said, these elections were free and fair, and we have the results of the second round placed Ms. Maia Sandu on the first place. She won with 57.72%, ahead of Igor Dodon, who got 42.28%. So the participation has increased from the first round. We had 52.78% of voters, and we had record numbers in these two polls, into these two rounds. I should state. We have, I think, a good record on the participation of the diaspora. We had over 149,000 people from diaspora participating in this democratic exercise, and in the second round we had a second record, which was more than 262,000 diaspora representatives participating. So this shows you a lot of mobilization outside of the country, and the president-elect got a very impressive score in the diaspora, with 92.94% of the diaspora voting for Maia Sandu. So as a result of this, we will have the first ever woman as president, and of course, as you mentioned, Yulia, during COVID times, this was not an easy exercise, both at home but also abroad. We have had 139 polling stations opened abroad, 12 in the United States. And of course, we made sure that all the safety measures are in place so that we could avoid COVID contamination. So this was not an easy exercise. But of course, the primary task of the authorities was to ensure free and fair elections. And I think the Central Election Commission and the Foreign Ministry, together with the embassies, did a good job in carrying out these responsibilities. So we have the results, what's next, so to say. The Central Election Commission should submit a report to the Constitutional Court on the results. And then the Constitutional Court has a 10 days period to validate the results of the elections. Incumbent President Dodon is likely to stay in office till December 23rd. This is the date when we would have 4 years of his term in office. And it is expected that the new president, the president-elect, would be inaugurated sometime after December 24th. President has in Moldova a series of powers, but Moldova is a parliamentary republic, and of course the president will eventually need the support of the parliament and of the government in order to fulfill agenda and election promises. So President-elect spoke extensively during this campaign about the need to fight corruption, the need to reform justice, to ensure rule of law, economic development, and of course she also pointed to the range of issues in the domain of foreign policy. We will talk about it maybe later on. Of course, she will need the support of the government and of the parliament to ensure these reforms. Many politicians, the incumbent president, the president-elect, other political leaders have talked recently about an eventual early elections in Moldova. So this is to be seen, because there are different interests of the parties, but this is not ruled out that at some point we might have snap elections. Of course, this needs to be in conformity with constitutional provisions, but this is something that we might face in the next year or so. So to conclude, I think it's important to take out as a result from these elections that we had free and fair elections. So democracy has been served. I think this is the most important conclusions that we can take out of this exercise. I think this has a good impact, of course, on the country, but also for the region. It would eventually bring stability and I think dialogue within Moldova and in the region. There has been a quite positive response from many capitals on this election result, and I hope that this positive atmosphere around the elections and the result would also serve as a good premise for stability and for cooperation in the region. Yulia, probably I will stop here on the internal side, and maybe we could continue with the foreign policy implications later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for touching upon possible snap elections and what implications that might have in terms of, until then, limiting the president's role according to the constitution, but also in balance to the parliament's role. So perhaps we can delve a little bit into that and what you expect that might look like in possible options. Let me turn to Ambassador Yelchenko. in terms of Ukraine's local elections that have been covered widely in the international media as well. And Ukraine pundits have been trying to explain or struggling to explain the pretty complex results that these elections show. Ambassador, how are we to understand the election results in Ukraine in the context of Ukraine's successful election decentralization process since 2014, and in the context of low voter turnout for what Ukrainian voters expect from these election results?
Thank you very much, Julia, and thank you, Middle East Institute. Yes, this is an important topic. I would like to start from probably one thing which is important to note, that the countries which we represent here are probably just a few among the others in the region which really have free and fair elections for many years, for decades right now. And I think this is the most important thing when you try to understand better, the political situation in the territory of the former Soviet Union and even wider in the Eastern Europe. Coming to the local elections in Ukraine, of course, I should say that politically speaking, they are not as important as presidential or parliamentary elections. This is traditionally so. Probably this is not very positive sign because, as you rightly said, after the reform on decentralization in Ukraine, the local authorities are supposed to have much higher control over the situation in their respective regions, starting from distribution of financial resources, which was always the problem in Ukraine. The budget process was so much centralized, so you cannot really lay a brick in the region without money being authorized or spending being authorized from Kiev. From now on, since the reform is implemented, of course, local authorities, as I said, have much more power. But yes, I agree with you that the very low turnout is possibly something which did not fit to the expectations of those who are preparing these elections. Nevertheless, the reason was, of course, the COVID restrictions and general economic situation, which didn't make people very optimistic and relying on elections result and expecting that their say will mean something important. But first of all, I would say that the results of local elections in Ukraine did not change much the political landscape. Yes, of course, the ruling party, the servant of people, the party of the President Zelensky, expected better results for their party. But still, the results were not so low as some opposition parties expected, and the political landscape remained more or less traditional in Ukraine terms, which 2, 3, sometimes 4 major parties having almost equal parts in the local authorities. The servant of the people, the bloc of former President Poroshenko, European Solidarity, Batkivshina or Motherland Party headed by Yulia Tymoshenko, which traditionally have between 15 to 20% in any elections during the last more than 10 years. And something which was not sensational, but still people expected less, that the main opposition party, which consists mostly of the former members of the Party of the Regions, which was in power in Ukraine before the Revolution of Dignity, and some other smaller parties which more or less leaning towards this opposition party, they also obtained probably up to one quarter, one third votes, but mostly in the eastern regions of Ukraine, which is a traditional region supporting them. So as I said, there were no sensations. Another result, which is quite, I would say, illustrative, is that almost all, let's say 90% of the mayors of major cities and towns in Ukraine were re-elected. We also had the second round just during the last weekend, and there are still some elections to go on, because according to our legislation, you have to obtain more than 50% of the votes. And but still, in cities like Kiev, Kharkiv, Lviv, Dnipro, and other big cities in Ukraine, the mayors remain the same, which is not bad, because it will mean stability. It means that people expect more from the experienced politicians, for people who have some background of remaining in power for many years. And I wouldn't say that there's a single contradictory figure among the mayors. And another good thing is that many of them belong to the parties which I mentioned, and there's sort of almost equal distribution of the mayors and different parties of Ukraine, which reflects the general political landscape in the country. But as Eugene rightly said, well, when we come to the foreign policy implications, I think that contrary to Moldova and Georgia, in our case, the local elections, they don't mean much in the sense of international politics. Yes, one can say that the results may reflect the opinion of the population in different parts of Ukraine, pro-Western, pro-Russian, whatever. But again, the local authorities do not have any influence on the foreign policy, and I think that in that case, the example of Ukraine is not the best, probably, for the current topic which we are discussing. But still, let me come back to what I started from and say that the best outcome of elections in all three of our countries is that they were fair and free, and they are certified by OSCE as such, and by all other international organizations, which means a lot for our countries, which means that we are strongly moving towards the real democracy and joining the European and Euro-Atlantic community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for this overview that balances out why local elections have been perceived as so interesting and have made a lot of headlines, particularly in the international media, despite them being local and hence not very telling of foreign policy. But you brought up this balance that Ukraine has been characteristic for before 2014, and then changing much after 2014 between Eastern and Western Ukraine and their and voters' preferences. So perhaps we can discuss that a little bit further on. But let me turn to Georgia, to the other side of the Black Sea, where recently parliamentary elections have been finalized in their second round with a clear and unsurprising, kind of predicted by the West, win for the party in power, Georgian Dream, interpreted largely as a consequence of their successful governance of the COVID pandemic. Ambassador Bakrazy, what has been at stake in your view in terms of Georgian elections?
Thank you very much. Good morning from Tbilisi, Georgia, where I had to come to participate in the meetings of the Secretary of State Pompeo during his recent visit to Georgia. Just yesterday, he had a meeting with the President, Prime Minister, with the Patriarch of Georgia, Foreign Minister. So let me start with, first of all, gratitude to the Middle East Institute, to the Frontier Europe Initiative, to personally Yulia for this very timely event. And I'm really glad to see my dear colleagues. And as everything else in these days, let me start with mentioning the COVID-19 and underlining the obvious that unfortunately the pandemic continues, shows very little inclination to ease up. So I had to mention it as the pandemic didn't deter Georgia from holding on October 31st its most democratic elections in the nation's history, within the higher than 4 years ago voter participation. So Georgia's successful response, as Julia mentioned, in dealing with the effects of the virus, as it was chronicled widely, I think contributed to the confidence of our voters to turn out in record numbers, as I said. So while we are still not out of the pandemic woods by a long shot, we are very proud of what we have achieved, and apparently so are most of the Georgians who gave the Georgian Dream ruling party a victory in the proportional part of our election, as well as in almost half of the single mandate districts, and the second round in the rest of that will take place this Saturday. I think this election tells a very clear story, and it's very important in many ways. For the first time ever, except for the first election that had no threshold at the beginning of 90s, except for that, it's for the first time that 9 political parties entered the parliament, met the threshold of the for representation, and it promises to be the highest number of opposition seats, making it the most diverse and inclusive parliament in the history of Georgia. And I think this is clearly the result of the constitutional and electoral changes that took place past summer, that was enacted by the parliament past summer. The governing party is the one who, and actually the ruling party in Georgia, who has replaced the mixed electoral system, which is more favorable to incumbent parties, and with this more proportional seats and were increased to have the chances for the opposition parties to gain their representation in the parliament, and that is what we are seeing now. Due to the high voter turnout, the ruling party gathered higher support in numbers compared to the outcome of the election of 4 years ago. But let me also look up and give you the exact statistics. So the Georgian Dream got 48%, the United National Movement 27%, the European Georgia almost 4%, the Patriots Alliance 3%, Labour Party 1%, the Citizens 1%, Strategy Armesheneveli 3%, almost 3% to the party Pine, and Lelo, the newly created party, got also 3%. We had a 1% threshold this year as a one-time decision to increase the participation of the political parties in the political process, as it was a kind of transition type of the election getting to 2024, when we will move fully to the fully proportional elections. No majoritarian, no single seat mandates will be distributed by that time. And this will create opportunity for many parties who could overcome the 1% threshold to participate and increase their visibility, their portfolio by the time when we will come to the 2024, and we will have higher threshold and we will have fully proportional elections. This is also for the first time that the party has got the third time confidence vote from the population. So I think it's obvious, and it was mentioned by my colleagues, that all of us gathered here represent nations where the democratic process is vital and where the vigilance against election irregularities must remain high. And because of Georgia's strong support coming from the United States, from the European Union, elections always put us under the powerful spotlight. So when OSCE, ODIHR, Observation Mission, Council of Europe, NATO Parliamentary Assembly, diplomatic missions to Georgia, of course, still these missions were limited given the COVID-19, but also the missions in Georgia from the US, UK, Germany, France, and others call the elections competitive with all the fundamental freedoms protected, as they did after the October 31st election. We are, of course, deeply gratified, and even with our remarkable progress, we are mindful that there is always room for more improvement, and well, that is the essence of democracy, clearly. Well, as I mentioned, I want to very briefly touch upon the very recent yesterday's visit of the Secretary Pompeo to Georgia, which we consider as a strong vote of confidence by the United States, our key strategic ally. The Secretary of State visited Georgia during his trip to Europe and Middle East, and he has very clearly, as all his predecessors visiting Georgia, stressed the very importance of creating conditions for the sustained stability in the region, which is now even more important given the challenges related to COVID-19, economic crisis, and other regional challenges. The Secretary Pompeo strongly underlined his support to sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia, and reiterated his support to our Euro-Atlantic aspirations, and made it clear that US-Georgia strategic partnership is based on our common values and deep love for freedom. So this attention in these times from the United States reflects the very strong, enduring commitment to Georgia. It is a constant refrain that accompanies high-level visits of many American leaders to Georgia for the last 3 decades, as US remains our main strategic partner. Further enhancement of these relationships and robust bilateral ties and active cooperation is the cornerstone of our foreign policy. And we anticipate it will continue as a dominant thread of our foreign and security policy tapestry. There was also mentioning of the foreign policy and implications of the foreign policy. So let me also very briefly touch on that as well in a couple of words. That's how this will impact Georgia's foreign policy. For us, these parliamentary elections, of course, reinforced our unbending commitment to be an integral part of the transatlantic community. And I should underline that just 3 years ago, through constitutional changes, Georgia's aspiration to European and Euro-Atlantic structures has become and has been embedded in the Georgia's constitution. And the mission, understandably, of this government and the overwhelming will of our people, which is often repeated, is to make Georgia a full member of NATO and the European Union. And this election results strengthened this resolve. And this is what voters want, and this is what we have pledged to deliver. It also strengthens the determination to restore Georgia's sovereignty, territorial integrity. This is something that we have never compromised on and definitely never will, and as we see, the voters agree. I will stop here and we'll be looking forward to further discussion.
Thank you, Ambassador Bakrazy, and thank you for bringing up the U.S. Secretary of State's visit that has just ended. So I'm looking forward to delving a little bit into that and what that might mean also as we're changing administrations here in the United States. I think we also have starting to get questions from the audience. Again, to our participants audience, please feel free to write them in our Q&A function, and I'll start weaving them into the discussion. But let me turn very briefly, now that we've all touched upon foreign policy and the implications for medium to long term, 4 years in most countries, a mandate, and ask Ambassador Karash. Moldova's electorate is often perceived as being divided between a Western orientation and an Eastern one. The outcome of the elections, the current, the most recent elections, have been largely perceived as Moldovans' pro-Western option, despite the fact that Maia Sandu has run on a platform that has emphasized a heavily reformist agenda in the terms of Western technical aspects, institutional aspects, but in terms of foreign policy, rather a balance between the West and the East, which could have attracted even more votes because of her neutral platform on that. How do you see, Ambassador, Moldova's foreign policy orientation during the presidency of Maia Sandu, and does not, and given the fact that Maia Sandu does not hold a majority in the Moldovan parliament, which limits some of her actions? You are still muted, Ambassador, if you could.
Yes, thank you. Look, I think I will reflect a bit on what President-elect said in the campaign. She indeed didn't play very much the geopolitical card. On the contrary, she said that the foreign policy of Moldova should be based on the needs of the people and of the population, what citizens need. And she said that, of course, we need to boost our relations with the neighbors, with Romania and Ukraine. We need to boost our relations with EU as a major actor for us in terms of a political dialogue, but also trade, and also US and Russia. So, of course, with other, when I say EU, I mean Brussels, but also the member states, of course. So she chose this rather broad rhetoric of making sure that she would be ready to work with anyone that would serve the interests of the country. And I think we would expect such an engagement from her based on pragmatic needs of the country and of the population. So my expectation would be that there will be more visits coming up by the president-elect when she is installed, when she is inaugurated, of course, in the office. I would expect her to pay visits to these capitals, to the countries that I mentioned. She did so while she was being prime minister for 5 months last year. So I would expect this intense diplomatic interaction with all key players in the region, including also with the US. So she has received, as I mentioned in the first part, she has received many messages of congratulations from capitals, from important and from all important and all friendly capitals, of course, and I'm sure these are clear signals to that she will be very welcomed, and she would probably also receive visits of foreign officials, the dignitaries. I think what the government has been doing in terms of economic, in terms of European integration, will continue and will get a new dynamics probably. So we are implementing the association agreement. We are in a process of negotiating a new association agenda for the next 7 years. So, as I mentioned, the EU is very important, both politically, diplomatically, but also trade-wise. The great success, of course, with the EU is the visa liberalization, and we witnessed 2.3 million Moldovan citizens traveling to Schengen area in the last 6 years. So, a lot of assistance is coming from the EU, from the US. And I think we will be expecting this to get increased. As I said, with the COVID-19 situation, of course, it's important to have the solidarity of all, and we will have to we appreciate what we have received from the US side, what we have received from other partners and friends, and I think we will be expecting this solidarity to grow. You mentioned about the situation in the parliament and what is at stake and what are the chances for snap elections. We have to wait and see how things will evolve. There was before the campaign started, we had a majority, very fragile, a very limited majority, but now the Democratic Party withdrew from this coalition, and we'll have to wait and see how things develop. The party of socialists, which supported incumbent President Dodon, is the largest faction in the parliament, 37 MPs out of 101. We will just, I think, it will be difficult now to forecast, but how things will evolve on forming a majority. But what I can tell is that the incumbent president, the president-elect, and other leaders, as I said, speak very much about eventual snap elections. I think there is a chance for that next year, and this is partly because people consider that the current composition of the parliament does not really reflect the outcome of the February 2019 elections, but also, as I put earlier, the incumbent president would also seek more support from the parliament and from the government in order to promote her both internal agenda, fighting corruption, rule of law, justice reform, but also probably foreign policy priorities. I think I'll stop here, Yulia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Karash. Ambassador Yelchenko, Ukrainian election results have been largely interpreted as at least partially undermining national parties' power at local level, including for Ukraine's president, while results, particularly in the East and in the South, could be indicative of an increased pro-Eastern orientation among Ukrainians that has been radically and continuously decreasing after 2014, of course. Do you believe that local elections will have any bearing on Ukrainians' foreign policy orientation? And will we see that reflected as a trend in future elections?
Thank you, Yulia. Well, I think not. Frankly, as I said earlier, that there is no implications on foreign policy vis-a-vis results of the local elections. Yes, they are the certain indicator of the popularity of the ruling party, but I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is sort of diminishing the power of the president, because even if he formally belongs to the ruling party, servant of the people, but this is a very new party. It was created under the circumstances after the election of Volodymyr Zelensky, and we should not overestimate. Even if this party still controls the vast majority in the parliament of Ukraine, but it's already being fragmented a little bit, separating into different groups of influence, and I don't think that we should think that this party will remain as it is in the coming years. I would rather refer to another thing, which, well, here I mean the other part of your question with regard to the whether Ukraine is becoming more pro-Western or more pro-Russian. You should look at the results of the recent pollings conducted in Ukraine with regard to the EU and NATO, and you will see that overall in Ukraine, the level of support of joining NATO is up to 60, even 61%, and it used to be just below 20% a couple of years ago. Strangely enough, the figures for the EU are a little bit lower. It's like between 46 to 51%, still high, even higher than in some EU countries. But probably this is the result, of course, of the Russian aggression and the high hopes of Ukrainians, of ordinary Ukrainians, for NATO as an kind of security umbrella. But not only this, this also testifies to the fact that the new generation of Ukrainians is growing up, and those people do not have any connections with the Soviet past, and they look at the world, including at EU and NATO, with totally different eyes. And these figures, yes, they differ from east to west of Ukraine, but not so much. Even in the eastern part of Ukraine, even in the territories close to the line in Donbass, the support for EU and NATO goes up to like 30-35%, which is very high given the traditional political taste of the population of those regions. And I also omitted one very important thing in my introduction, that of course, talking about the foreign policy implications, we should keep in mind that there were no elections in the occupied part of the eastern Ukraine, occupied by Russia, and of course in Crimea, because it was not even technically possible, not saying politically. And of course, we would really prefer the election being held in the east of Ukraine, because this is one of the key points in the so-called Minsk agreements. But we continue to stick to the very strong position that security first. We cannot conduct elections in the east, in the uncontrolled part of Donbass, without having proper security conditions and proper international control, and of course without participation in such elections of the main Ukrainian parties and the media. It is not possible to have any real results there. Of course, Russia has totally different position. They still insist on having elections first, and then giving a kind of autonomous status to those territories after they would elect, so-called legal representatives to the local authorities. But of course, this is not supported not just by Ukraine, but by also other two participants of the so-called Normandy format, France and Germany. They're completely on our side, and of course by any other major player in this world, including the United States.
Thank you, Ambassador. And let me turn to Georgia. Actually, in Georgian elections, the country's pro-Western orientation has not been at stake, something that is confirmed also by the US Secretary Pompeo's visit to Tbilisi that has ended just as we speak. Ambassador Bakrazy, what can you tell us in light of this visit and the election results about the country's foreign policy for the next years? And can you also weigh in on a question that we have from our audience in terms of military and security, NATO, Georgia's cooperation with NATO in the next few years, in the context of a Biden administration? How you see the new government, Georgia's foreign policy orientation, overwhelmingly Western, and in the bilateral relationship in the context of this visit as well?
Thank you for the question. Well, to start with the visit, as I said, it was a reiteration of the U.S.'s strong support to the territorial integrity of Georgia, but also, as it was mentioned in the opening tweet of the Secretary Pompeo when he visited Georgia, that it is also a strong support to Georgia's Euro-Atlantic integration. Exactly during the visits, we have touched on the main issues of our strategic partnership, which includes the defense and security cooperation. As you know, we have signed the Memorandum of Understanding on Defense and Security in 2016. We are now enjoying the Georgia Defense Readiness Program, which is renewed every 3 years. And of course, we cooperate, and this is relevant to our other panelists. We're also participating in the Black Sea security efforts by the NATO and by the United States, of course. During this visit, of course, the economic and trade items were also discussed. We are all facing the challenges emerging from the COVID-19 results and the economic crisis, and it is important that US strongly supports, and the Prime Minister mentioned and called on more US participation in the region, not only in defense and security, but also in the economic field, to increase the trade capacity that the region and the United States has. When it comes to the democratic development, this is also yet another direction of our strategic partnership. It's important, and the government is committed, the Prime Minister is committed to continue and work on the good results of the previous waves of the judiciary reform or electoral reform. The reforms of this summer has manifested in the very diverse parliament that the Georgian public voted for. And therefore, of course, there are still a lot to do and move the agenda forward. Of course, President-elect Biden is an old friend of Georgia, and he has visited the country a number of times. Of course, we are always grateful for his staunch support to Georgia when he was the chair of the senator and chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, but also as a vice president. And we know this, and we have worked on this. We have built this bipartisan support to Georgia, to Georgia's, to U.S.-Georgia strategic partnership, and our Euro-Atlantic and European aspirations. So we are optimistic for the coming 3 years, and definitely looking forward to work with our colleagues here and in DC, of course.
Thank you, Ambassador. We have a few minutes left, so I'd like to go through one round of quick questions and answers to be able to limit us to 5 to 10 minutes, but focusing on some of the questions that we've gotten very interesting from the audience. So let me start with Moldova, with Ambassador Karash. There's 2 questions. First of all, frozen conflicts and election processes there. We've heard from Ukraine the impossibility of holding elections in their occupied territories. How did this go work as a process in these elections in terms of did it work, and what are the results of that? And then second of all, we have a question in terms of the possibility of direct Russian provocations following the election of Maya Sandu, as we've seen similar actions in Georgia and Ukraine. Now, I think this is very unlikely, and though President Dodon for the last 4 years has run on a campaign that is an officially pro-Eastern orientation, what I was trying to allude to earlier when it comes to Maya Sandu is that she doesn't stand for what many outside observers might perceive her in terms of the Russian relationship. So given these 2 frozen conflicts, Transnistria elections, and the reaction of Russia to the election outcomes in Moldova, can you weigh in on this briefly?
Certainly, thank you. Now, on the election, we have had in the both rounds 42 polling stations open on the right bank of the river Nistru for citizens of Moldova residing in Transnistrian region of the country. So they basically could cast their votes in both rounds. So, and this is what happened. So, this is usual, the usual procedure for in any elections. We have our citizens residing in Transnistria crossing the river to cast their votes on the right bank. This is the first part. The second one on the Russian action. Well, as I said, many leaders congratulated President-elect with her victory, and including the Russian president congratulated her on these results. And of course, I do not see any premises for any kind of provocation on these grounds. On the contrary, as I said, Ms. Sandu said during her campaign that she would be ready to engage with Russia in all matters that are in our bilateral agenda, including trade, but also, of course, the settlement of the Transnistrian conflict. And when she was asked about how she looks at solution to the conflict, she said, of course, first of all, she would fight the illegal schemes of smuggling and contraband in the region, but also to work through a political dialogue, we did the so-called 5+2 format, where Russia also participates in order to find a solution to open the so-called three basket of the talks on Transnistrian settlement, and here is of course important to underline that this should be done on the premises of territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Republic of Moldova within the internationally recognized borders. So such a solution. So I see it's a complex issue. The unresolved Transnistrian conflict is an issue and is a challenge to the security of my country, but also for the whole Black Sea region. It is a challenge, a security challenge, and we will need to tackle it in the manner that I just described a bit earlier. Thank you, Yulia.
And let me turn to Ambassador Yelchenko on Ukraine. There's an interesting question from our audience in terms of the great influence on the population confidence of elections as individuals and as a nation as a whole, especially thinking of America's recent history and also in the context of Ukraine, American bilateral relations that have been complicated over the last few years, and now that we expect a Biden administration for Ukraine's bilateral relationship with the United States, how do you see that helping, if it does, in terms of creating solidarity among Black Sea regional security and creating solidarity or contributing to Western solidarity in and outside the borders of Ukraine?
Thank you, Yulia. This is an important question. I would answer in two parts. The first part is that regardless of who is elected president of the United States, and this was in the past and currently and in the future, Ukraine always enjoyed very strong bipartisan and bicameral support in the United States, in the Congress, and it will remain the same. The vivid example is yesterday's resolution adopted by the Congress, which has, many things, including further sanctions against Russia on Nord Stream 2 and the welcoming of the Three Seas initiatives, which is directly connected with at least Ukraine and Moldova, although formally we're not part of that initiative, but we are sort of observers and we will become the part of this initiative. The second part of the question, how it may influence the solidarity or the attention of the Western world in general and the United States in particular towards the Black Sea region, I think that we have a very bright perspective in that sense, because we strongly believe, and I think it's not only the opinion in Ukraine and into other countries which represent here, but wider, that the Biden administration, or let's say democratic administration, will have more foreign policy oriented approach. And we don't need to blame for anything the current administration, because as far as Ukraine is concerned, for example, we had a very strong support, and during Trump presidency, Ukraine has started to receive a very practical, concrete military and defense and security assistance and weapons, including lethal weapons to sustain the Russian aggression, and many other good things happened, including the whole chain of rounds of strengthening the sanctions against Russia, and Nord Stream 2 is just one example. There were many others, including with regard to Crimea and other things. But still, there are more people with the deeper knowledge of Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and the region in general in the circle of experts, which certainly will have some sort of participation and appointments in the future by the administration. So we look very positively on that. We believe that our region will not just remain in focus, but will receive much more attention from the future U.S. administration. And certainly this would also help our European partners in stronger links and bonds between U.S. and the EU, stronger role of U.S. in NATO, more attention to NATO policies. It will also help all three our countries to develop in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let's hope that much more attention and also much more support, both from the United States and from European partners and allies. Last but certainly not least, let me turn to Georgia. We have a bunch of questions for you, Ambassador, but I'll reframe myself to two of them. The one is in terms of employment and economy as being the top issues for voters prior to the October 31st elections. In light of the COVID challenges, to what extent do you think that the government will have this as a priority to address economic growth and poverty in the context of the difficult crisis? And then the second question, when it comes to Georgia's election process and the current political crisis in Georgia, how legitimate will a Georgian parliament be if all opposition parties, which they do right now, but they might still change their opinion, refuse to take up their mandates? Could you unmute yourself, please, Your Excellency?
Yes, sorry, thanks. First of all, about the economy, I think this was a very clear message that came from the government, and I think that has really helped how the government has dealt with both first of all the COVID-19 challenges, and the second, the recovery plans, and the vote of confidence was received during the October 31st elections. Of course, we all understand that COVID-19 is not over yet, and we will have to position ourselves the way that will strengthen our position once the economy reopens in the world, and once we are back to the usual business. When it comes to the, as it was referred to in the question, so-called political crisis, I think I would like to, as I mentioned, that there was a strong, very big, comprehensive electoral reform this summer. And now let me read a couple of excerpts from the statement of the State Department during the visit of the Secretary Pompeo that refers to that process of negotiations that is now undergoing. The statement states that some problems that we saw in the election can be and should have been included in the electoral reform that was done during this summer. The opposition was boycotting parliament then, so that electoral reform was not as strong and forceful as it might have been had they been part of the process of change within the parliament. So to see them calling for a boycott again is like watching the same movie again. And we are encouraging them to go into the parliament, do electoral changes that is meaningful, etc., etc. There is a clear understanding in everyone's mind that the mandate that was given to all the political parties is a responsibility, and of course the dialogue that is facilitated by the US and the EU ambassadors, I am very hopeful will bring to good results that will strengthen the stability, that will strengthen the democratic institutions in the country, including the parliament.
Thank you for this very clear overview of what's going on. Before we have to wrap up our conversation, I will give the last word on this kind request to Ambassador Karash, as he hasn't had the opportunity to address the bilateral relationship with the United States and the support that the United States provides for Moldova. So, Ambassador, very quickly, if you could make your remarks on that, and then we'll wrap up the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Indeed, I felt that I should also point out how on the US support, because I was very much focusing on what's in Europe around the Moldova and inside Moldova, but I wanted to just to acknowledge how important is the US support for Moldova, for our democratic development, and there is a strategic dialogue in place with the US, and it has a very broad agenda, good governance, economic development. So all these are very important elements of our bilateral agenda with the US, and the US is very supportive on the Transnistrian settlement, if we are talking about the security in the Black Sea region. So we count on continued US support within the 5+2 on the issue of the Transnistrian settlement, and also on the issue of withdrawal of Russian troops from the territory of the Republic of Moldova, which are located in the Transnistrian region. So all this, the political dialogue, the economic agenda are in place, and we put many hopes on continued support from the US side with the new administration incoming. So thank you very much, Yulia, for this.
Thank you. And I would like to thank Your Excellencies for honoring my invitation for our webinar, for your very interesting insights and analyses of what is going on with elections in the Black Sea region. This was a very interesting conversation. I hope we'll have the opportunity to do that again soon around similar events in the region and on bilateral relations with the West, and particularly with the United States. I would like to also give a big thank you to our audience for listening to us and for all your interesting questions. I wish you all a pleasant rest of the day or evening. Thank you, everyone, so